Yeah, I was given a talk a few weeks ago, and we discovered the same kind of problem where the people in the back really couldn't hear, and all the people in the front offered to trade places with them. You know, so I have my son outside. We're standing out on the deck in the summertime, and there's a full moon, and I'm holding him like this, and I said, "Randy, you see that moon?" He says, "Yeah, Daddy." I said, "Your daddy made that." So that was supposed to be funny. I judge the IQ of my audience by how they respond to my incredibly brilliant and subtle humor. So, Dimensional Fund Advisors, $235 billion under management. I'm happy to say. $100 billion is not bad. Although, I can remember when $100 billion used to be a lot of money. The current administration, it doesn't mean much. I'm sorry. First of all, I want to congratulate Lindenwood University on your incredibly innovative and bold move into the chess world. It has made news all over the world. And what's going to happen is you're going to attract the smartest students you've ever seen. I think that you will end up attracting very, very strong chess players from all over the world. It'll be a wonderful thing for you. And as you know, Webster University is doing the same thing. And if we could only get Washington U and St. Louis to do it, then this area would become the dominant power in world chess without any doubt whatsoever. The chess theme here is good, and it's a theme for Missouri. Missouri needs to make some good moves. For the last 70 or 80 years, they've been making some really bad moves with their tax policy. And it has caused them to really stultify their growth. We've had tremendous job loss of population. Let's see if we have some here. Okay, the last census. You know, we lost a member of the U.S. Congress. We lost a representative, as did a number of states. Now, this is hard to read, unfortunately. But let's look at some of these states. These orange states, there and there, they gained 2 or more congressional seats. Up here, Nevada gained a seat. Washington gained a seat. Tennessee gained a seat. Up here is a gain of a seat. New Hampshire. What do they all have in common? None of them have an income tax. And they have been growing like weeds chronically for decades and decades, and it's going to continue. At the beginning of the 20th century, Missouri had 16 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. Now we're down to 8. The Northeast used to be dominant in terms of the number of representatives, and they are chronically losing congressional seats, except for New Hampshire, which doesn't have an income tax. And let's see, the people that lost seats: Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, they all have an income tax. So the population is moving consistently from states with income taxes to states without income taxes. And the reason for that is simple. The returns to work and the returns to investments are higher if you don't tax them. If tomorrow we could push a button and eliminate Missouri's 6% income tax, then every prospective investment in the state would suddenly have an expected return that is 6 percentage points higher. And so those investments that before that moment perhaps were not attractive, many of them would now be attractive. You can think about this on the national level. Why are corporations and individuals hoarding cash? Why are they not making new investments? Yeah, there's uncertainty and all of that. There's always uncertainty. We live in a world of uncertainty. But what we have at the federal level is the very serious prospect. In fact, in this case, I would say the probable prospect that taxes will go up in 2013 with the expiration of the Bush tax cuts, and in 2014, they will go up nearly another 5 percentage points. So we're looking at somewhere between 9 and 10 percentage points. Now, if you consider that you're a business person and you want to make an expansion or an addition of any sort, you want to hire people, you have to say, what's the return on that investment? And let's say it's 25%. Well, maybe that's good enough, maybe it's not. But when somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, wait, taxes are going to be going up 10 percentage points, now your expected return is 15%. Clearly not going to be enough in an illiquid, non-publicly traded company to make those investments, and that's why there is no investment activity. And that's not going to change until those tax increases come off the table, are the prices of all real resources, the inputs to investments, fall enough to restore the expected returns that are needed. Now this is Missouri state income tax schedule, and it is really a disgrace. This started in 1931. We set the brackets, and the top tax for a while was 4%, but then under Warren Hearns it went up to 6%. And we have, how many? 4, 5, 6, 10 brackets, the most in the United States. So at least we can say something for our tax schedule, right? We got more brackets than anybody else. These, oops. You can't give me this kind of stuff. This is way too high tech. You know, I need a pointer, you know. Anyway, these brackets, look at these income levels. It starts at $1,000 in adjusted gross income. This is pretty close to a regressive tax. Very low income people in Missouri pay income taxes, and they pay a lot. When you get to $9,000 in adjusted gross income, you're paying 6% on everything in addition. Now, even low income people make more than $9,000 unless they're not working at all. So this is, you can really fairly well say, we have a horribly regressive tax. It just starts off quickly. So low income people don't have the opportunity to accumulate income because we're taxing it quickly. These rates, these dollar levels of rates were set in 1931 and were never adjusted for inflation. Had they been adjusted for, well, let's look, average per capita income in Missouri in 1972, this is hard to believe, was $4,400 or $4,500. And in 2009, it's $36,000. So what has happened? Even the low income earners have been thrown into the top brackets. So it causes a high rate of taxation. Now, believe it or not, there is a silver lining there. And that is, as we try to get rid of this income tax in this state so that we become a growth state and we start creating jobs and we don't force our children to have to leave the state to get a job after they get out of college or after they get out of vocational school, and we do lose students and new graduates and population and wealth, and I'll describe that in a moment. The nice thing about having everybody pay taxes is everybody's got some skin in the game, and they can all benefit by changing our tax structure. And our proposal, without going into details, is to broaden extensively the sales tax base. We only tax about $60 billion of goods and services in the state of Missouri. That's the sort of the general revenue of the items that are subject to sales tax. If we double that to approximately 110 or 120 billion, we can raise the sales tax rate up to a maximum 2.75 additional percentage points and wipe out 6 percentage points of an income tax. So it's a very worthwhile trade-off, and the states that do that grow like weeds all the time. Okay, here is, this will make you sick. This is the growth of Missouri and a few other states over 4 decades, 5 decades actually. You can see Missouri is 43rd over this whole period, 1963 to 2010. Over the last 12 years, we're 48th, and so we're working our way down the last. And you can see what it was in the various decades. Only once by chance were we halfway decent. But these are 3 states, Tennessee, Texas, and Washington, that don't have an income tax. Now, Tennessee was a state that was smaller than the state of Missouri by every economic measure in 1947. And in 1947, its Supreme Court threw out their income tax. They said their constitution did not give the state the authority to impose an income tax. And they passed Missouri over the past 60 years. It's just blown by us in every economic measure you can think of. We may even have a table here. By the way, if you want to get a lot more detail, go to the website of showmeinstitute.org. It is the think tank that Professor Wall referred to. And we have lots of papers on income taxes. The one I would refer you to is a paper called The Missouri Compromise that was written by the great Art Laffer, creator of Reaganomics, the creator of Thatcheronomics, the creator of the Laffer curve. And he's very interested in our efforts. He's come and given talks for us many times. And he loves coming to St. Louis. Now I'm going to warn you, what I'm going to say is extraordinarily funny. The reason he loves coming to St. Louis is we have the largest Laffer curve in the world. So, this abysmal performance over a long period of time is due to a number of factors. What we believe the single most important factor is our income tax structure, because it makes investments and work less profitable for our residents, and so they move to states where it is more profitable. Let's take, for example, in the last 12 years, the amount of AGI, it's adjusted gross income, the aggregate adjusted gross income that left the state of Missouri, that's accounting for people who moved in and people who moved out. The net number was a negative $1.5 billion. Now you multiply that by a tax of say 6%, you can see it's almost $100 million a year that is lost to the state every year, and the number keeps growing. Tennessee, a no income tax state, their migration of adjusted gross income was positive $6 billion. Texas was positive $17 billion. Florida, another zero income tax state, was positive $70 billion, 70 billion. So we talked about the House of Representatives folks gradually moving to the no income tax states. So is the wealth, so is the opportunity, and so are the jobs. Last year, Missouri did accomplish something. We were number one in job loss in the nation. Number one. So, and you know, it's going to continue unless our tax policy changes. Okay, here's a few economic statistics, and in the paper I referred to, the Missouri Compromise, there's a lot more of this stuff. Art Laffer has spent his whole life studying the relations of tax policy and growth, all sorts of tax policy. If we look at gross state product, that's the state version of gross national product. You can see the states with no personal income tax over this particular period, almost 14%. The states, the 10 states with the highest rate, 6.5% growth. Just a staggering difference. Population growth, 61% to 45%. And the non-farm payroll employment, no income tax states, 8%, and those with the highest rate, less than 0.5%. I mean, these are just staggering numbers. Okay, this is, you know, so we got this sort of the static experiment that existed over a long period of time. And that is, we look at the states with an income tax and compare them to the states without an income tax, and we observe massive differences that occur almost all the time. But we could do a controlled experiment to measure the flip side of that. How about taking states that don't have an income tax and make them impose one, and then watch what happens? Well, fortunately, or unfortunately, for the other states, there were 11 states that as far back as 1962 did not have an income tax, and they subsequently imposed one on their people. And you can see it. What happened to their share of U.S. output declined in 11 out of 11 cases. You know, it's just surefire. So if there was no connection between taxes and growth, you've got statistical students here, you could figure out the odds of going 0 for 11 if there was no relation. So pretty clear there's something going on here. Now this just shows the distribution. I'm not even sure why this chart is in here, but Travis puts this in here, so I have to say something about it. This is the distribution of income by income in the state of Missouri for households, that's the blue, and then families, married couples, and single. And you can see where where it clusters around in here. But the real point is, there's almost nobody, very few, making less than $10,000. For the most part, those are students. People are working part-time or not working at all. And so as they start working, their incomes jump up pretty quickly, so they have a lot subject to the state income tax. And this was just giving examples of different types of occupations and what their tax levels are. Oh, this, I can't believe this. All right. We're going to replace the sales tax. I mean, we're going to replace we hope to replace the income tax with a sales tax. And this fellow, Chris Kelly, is a Democratic state representative in the Columbia area. And And I'm going to repeat, he's a Democrat, and he has been advocating getting rid of the income tax since Adam and Eve. He knows, he just gave a talk the other day in Columbia for the Show Me Institute. And while he and I disagree on some things, we agree strongly. To quote him, raising state revenue through an income tax is just about the dumbest thing a state could do. Now, they have a sales tax exemption. If our measure passes, whenever we get it on the ballot, we're going to get rid of this one. There's an exception for giant boats on the Lake of the Ozark. If these boats are available for the Coast Guard or the U.S. military, in case we are attacked, you just make that available. I'm not making this up. You can't make this up. They're exempt from sales taxes. So if you got a yacht, and there are a lot, you've been to Lake of the Ozarks, you know how many big boats are there. They're all exempt from sales taxes. Now, maybe they have to be there just in case the Kansas Navy attacks us. But that's this is a good example of the rich and the powerful and the connected getting exempted from taxes, but Joe Sixpack having to pay them. The best example is what happened recently in the state of Illinois. They raised their personal income taxes 70%, went from 3 to either 5 or 5.5. They raised their corporate taxes from 5% to 7%. And you follow the news, you know what happened. All of the big corporations just got in line, said to the state government, if you stick us with that additional corporate tax, we're leaving. So they all get exempted. Now, can you imagine one of you as an individual employee going to Springfield and saying, I want to talk to the governor, and I'd like to address the General Assembly. I want to tell them that if they don't lower my personal income tax, I'm going to leave the state of Illinois? I mean, do you think anybody would get an audience? No. Joe Sixpack doesn't get that protection. The average working person, they pay the higher taxes. The wealthy, the politically connected, do not. It's the same thing that happens in this state. It's the same thing that happens in every state that has an income tax. And the way they do it is tax credits. We want to do some big investment, give us a whole bunch of tax credits. Missouri right now is allocating or spending approximately $600 million a year in tax credits to the politically connected. What we're saying is if you're doing that, how about giving a tax credit to everybody and just phase out the income tax and be done with the tax credits? It works in all the states that have tried it. Oh, that's the statute that's unbelievable. Anyway, what we're really trying to do by getting rid of the income tax and moving to a sales tax is shift everybody's wealth to the right. And there we go. That's basically what will happen. Everybody wins in this proposition. And jobs will start coming back to Missouri. And businesses will start to come in. And those of you who are in business, you sell goods or services, like Lindenwood University, you're going to have more people with higher incomes to sell them to. And that's going to be true of everybody in every business. Everybody wins. So it's your income and your career, and pretty soon it's going to be your move. I look around and I see all of you are voting or a voting age. God, some of you are so old, I think you were voting since the American Revolution. I know I was, So, at some point, we are going to put this on the Missouri ballot. We're not sure exactly which measure. It's going to be extraordinarily difficult to persuade the people that this is the thing to do, because the problem is this is such a wonderful state. The people are so great. It's such an incredibly beautiful state that lots of people are really content and happy. And what they don't understand is how this horribly sluggish growth actually is denying them, and especially their children, opportunities. That's going to be the challenge, to persuade them that we really are in a bad state of affairs, and we can change that. And that's the Show Me Institute. I would encourage you to go there. That is the Missouri think tank, co-founded by myself and Crosby Kemper III and Professor Mike Podgorski of the University of Missouri. And there's loads of papers on every topic. Other issues that we're dealing with is, for example, the earnings tax in St. Louis and Kansas City. Those taxes, it's a 1% tax, but it doesn't just hurt those two cities. It hurts the state of Missouri because it drives people out of the city of St. Louis. Now, if it drove everybody into St. Louis or St. Charles County or into counties that are in Missouri, then it's a net wash. Then we wouldn't care. But you know what is the fastest growing part of Metro St. Louis, it's in Illinois. And the fastest growing part of Kansas City is in Kansas. And you can thank the earnings tax for that. I have interviewed people, doctors, a whole practice of neurologists a few years ago. They moved out of the city of Kansas City. Who said, why did you move? Said the number one reason was a stupid earnings tax. So that's another thing we're trying to get rid of. And there are a couple of very good papers on our website about the effects of an earnings tax. One is written by Professor Joe Haslek, who is our chief economist, and the other is written by Professor Howard Wall, a fabulous paper, and I encourage you to read them. Why are you so shocked?
I'm not shocked that's fabulous, I'm shocked that it's no.
Oh. I stayed up all night reading your paper. I'm waiting for the stage play to come out. So, we'll go back to that. So, with that, I would be happy to take questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you said earlier that the state of Tennessee did us out in every economic factor you could think of. I looked up this data. I'm an engineer. 8 out of the last 10 years, the state of Tennessee has had higher unemployment than we have had. They have about a 6% less median income or average income than we do. So that's just not true. In addition to that, we are looking at income taxes for people like yourself, taxes in general, state and local taxes in Texas being about 3% for the top 1% and 12% for the bottom 25%. Why in the world do we want to get rid of income tax, which is what you really pay, and put it on sales tax, which is what we really pay?
The reason you want to do it is it promotes growth. Income tax is just the worst way to collect revenue. Secondly, the sales tax, the low-income people under our proposals are basically going to be exempt from sales taxes. They'd also be exempt from income taxes. Right now, they pay both. And if it's structured properly, they become better off very quickly because their income tax goes. You saw that income taxes are paid at very low income levels. Now, all I can do with respect to your first comments is refer you to the paper, The Missouri Compromise, on our website. It has a whole page of detailed statistics comparing Missouri and Tennessee. I don't recall over what time period, but that comparison shows quite the opposite of what you were describing. I can't dispute your figures because I don't have them in front of me. And it also shows the growth of GSP, gross state product, since 1947. And there are two straight lines, except the slopes of them are different. And the Tennessee line is always growing at a faster slope than Missouri. It's just a constant rate that's higher. Yes, sir?
Sir, could you explain what you mean by low-income people and then tell us how they would be exempt from sales tax?
Well, low-income people, for example, in Missouri, if you have $1,000 of adjusted gross income, you already start paying 1 or 1.5%. Okay, so that's what I mean by low income. If you go to 9,000, at that point, on any marginal dollars, they're paying 6%.
So you're saying that anyone who makes less than $1,000 a year will be exempt from the sales tax?
No, anybody right now in Missouri that makes less than $1,000 of income is exempt from an income tax.
Yes, I understand.
Which means everybody who makes more is paying some income tax. The way the poor, let's suppose you have somebody making $10,000, hardly a high salary. Okay, under our proposal, they will pay no income tax. Nobody will. So they're immediately better off. And the sales tax is the items that the poor and low income tend to buy will be pretty much tax exempt. Now, some things like housing vouchers, food stamps, or whatever they're called now, those are already tax exempt by federal law. So they will continue to be sales tax exempt. That's how they're going to be better off. They're going to be exempt basically, largely, or maybe completely from both taxes. Right now, they pay both taxes. Yes, sir.
Two questions. One, a few months ago, there was a big input on the economy of St. Louis with the China hub. What torpedoed that? What happened?
The single institution, not the single, but the institution most responsible for torpedoing that was the Show Me Institute. And it was basically a giant subsidy. They were going to build warehouses in the St. Louis airport. And I refer you to our website because we have loads of papers on it. There was 2 million square feet of empty warehouse space in and around Lambert Airport, and they wanted to pay massive subsidies to build more. And The papers give a lot more detail. The thing was never going to happen anyway. You know, a few years earlier, we had this thing Bombardier, where the state wanted to give $880 million of tax credits to the Bombardier Aircraft Company, headquartered in Quebec, Canada. And they said, give us this money, and we'll come and we'll build airplanes and blah, blah, blah. Well, first they had tried to take that proposal to Arizona, and Arizona said, take a hike. Then they went to the state of New York. This is amazing. The state of New York said, not interested, take a hike. They went to Missouri, and it actually passed, not at $880 million. We were able, the Show Me Institute again, and a lot of others, were able to get it reduced to $240 million. And I had at that time, I called Governor Blunt, Speaker Rod Jetton, the heads of the Senate, everybody I knew. I said, look, and I liked all those people and admired them. I said, I want you to know this is really an awful deal. This is a subsidy for the wealthy. It's not going to produce any airplanes. It's just going to transfer taxpayer dollars to this entity, if they ever come at all. But in fact, what's really going on is they're using us as a stalking horse to go back to the province of Quebec to negotiate a better deal for themselves. And even though it passed to $240 million, that is precisely what happened. They stayed in Quebec and got some tax credits from Quebec.
Are you optimistic that maybe Missouri will get that business?
No, we won't get that business. No, we won't. When you do these tax credits, they don't pay for themselves. Not to say that sometime, somewhere, there isn't a government-sponsored tax credit that might be profitable. I read somewhere that the Erie Canal in the 1800s was a good deal for the taxpayers, but there haven't been many since.
As far as corporate loopholes and the shifting of money taken in from large corporations, Target, Home Depot, it gets transferred from state to state to state, and we don't even see the taxes that come from the purchases that the individual makes at these corporate entities, because it's sort of like corporate money laundering throughout. So even if everything was based on purchases, consumable tax, there's no guarantee, even though those jobs come to the state, that money's gonna stay in the state with that corporate loophole still in place.
No, you're right. Really, the way to describe this is the way we described the nuclear problem during the time of the Cold War. It's mutually assured destruction. And it's the taxpayers who end up paying these subsidies. You're absolutely right. There's no guarantee that money will come back. You know, if this was such a great idea, the states would be showing us the rates of return on these investments. You know, I was in the investment management business for a long time, and I can tell you it's very difficult, in fact, it's basically impossible, for managers to beat markets, to pick winners and avoid losers with any consistency. And they're trying to do it in the publicly traded markets of stocks and bonds around the world, where all sorts of information is publicly available. And these investment managers are presumably the best and the brightest in their business. And they can't do it. What makes anybody think that government officials, many of whom who have never invested anything in their life, could possibly know which investments are going to pay off for a state and which to avoid? They don't even go through that process. This is a politically connected process where they have lobbyists, and it sounds good to the politicians. They say we're going to generate jobs. Missouri's not generating jobs. We're 48th now out of 50, and we've been doing this to the tune of $500 or $600 million a year. If this stuff was so beneficial, we'd be the fastest growing state in the nation. Yes, sir.
What role, if any, do you see for getting internet sales into the taxable base for the state of Missouri?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a very important one, and it's the one place where I differ with some of my free market colleagues, and I think I've got Art Laffer persuaded now, that we do have to get everything that's sold via the internet taxed at the state level. And the reason is just take it to the extreme. Suppose that all sales occurred on the internet, and there was no more brick and mortar sales. Then there would be no state tax revenue coming from sales taxes. Then how would the state and localities raise money? They would all have to raise their income taxes a lot, which would hurt productivity and growth, etc. That's why we have to get that. I think that Congress, and there's a whole group of states that are working on this, I think they're coming together where eventually that's going to happen. Now, fortunately, in the interim, we haven't had the movement to internet sales that people forecast probably 12 years ago, or 14 years ago, where we thought the whole brick and mortar stuff was gonna go away. And so we had this huge internet and high-tech boom in the stock market. It just went crazy. NASDAQ went up to 5,000, now it's like 2,500. And then after a couple of years, people realized, hey, you know, that was a reasonable model. It turns out it isn't true, it's not gonna happen, and we had the tech crash. Yes, sir?
It sounds like your solutions need to be political. And actually, Lindenwood graduate is currently the chairman of the Ways and Means in the House, Andrew Koenig. Are you working with him? And in reality, how soon will these changes take place if they will take place?
I'm not working with him personally, but we do have a whole political army that is separate from the Show Me Institute. That political army is about 40 people. It's grassroots, grass tops. They can lobby, they can do all that stuff. So if you give them money, or if you give money to our campaign, which we haven't advertised for yet, that is not tax deductible. If you give money to the Show Me Institute, which is a 501c3, which therefore limits what they can do, they can advocate, but they can't go and lobby and, you know, and go after or protect certain candidates or certain legislation. So you can give money to them and take a tax deduction. And if you do, I just want you to know that no amount is too large. We're looking at the various approaches to this, and we poll them. And as I said, it's going to be difficult. First of all, we have to see which ballot we're going to be on. We don't know if we're going to be on 2012 or 2014. Right now, we're in litigation. When you file a ballot initiative, anybody in the state has a right to sue you. And once the initiative, the language is approved by the Secretary of State, then generally it's a lawsuit against the state. We're in litigation over the fiscal note. We submit a note to the state auditor and say, here's what we think the fiscal impact of this is if it's approved. And opponents can come in and say, no, here's what we think it is. We're in court over that issue. I don't know when that's going to be resolved. But it may take 4 or 5 different proposals before the people are comfortable voting for this. For example, one of them is to phase it out over about 4 or 6 years. Bring the income tax down a bit, bring the sales tax up a bit, broaden the base so many more things are taxed. But you could do it over a longer period. Or you could say to them, like we did in Prop A, how about ask Missouri voters, would you like the opportunity every 2 years to vote on lowering your income tax 1 point and raising the sales tax enough to offset those revenues, so it's always revenue neutral. And just have that come up every 2 years until the income tax is gone. That's another approach. That's what's going to happen with the earnings taxes in St. Louis and Kansas City, because about 70% of you and all the voters in the state of Missouri voted for Prop A. Now, at regular elections in St. Louis and Kansas City, they have to put the earnings tax on the ballot, and it's a simple proposition: do you want to continue this tax? And if they ever vote no, then the tax is phased out over 10 years per the statute. So it's going to be difficult. And I'm not working with that representative, but I'm sure that army of 40 people is working with him closely. Yes, sir.
Well, you may have answered the question I was going to raise, because I see a drop in income taxes being a one-time deal where you lose a lot of revenue at one time. And if your premise is right, you get economic growth, that would occur over a long period of time. So I was wondering what happens in the meantime when states are struggling with their budgets.
Okay, there are a couple points. In all of our proposals, they are designed to be revenue neutral at each step of the way. So you take the income tax down by X dollars, expressed as a percent. You take the sales tax up by enough to offset that. So there will be no loss in revenues. And but the key to it is broadening the base. You know, right now in Missouri, only 24% of transactions are taxed in the sales tax. We're going to try to take that up to, I think, 45 or 46%, taking the base from roughly 60 billion to over 110 billion. That's what enables us to simply have to raise, when it's all said and done, this could take years, only have to raise the sales tax 2.75% to get rid of a 6% income tax. But it's a good one. Revenue neutrality is very important. In fact, what we estimate is, as this transition takes place, the state will get more growth, so this will probably be running a surplus almost from year one. Yes, sir.
I'm Brother Bob, and I'm here for the River City Examiner newspaper. I'm a publisher and material artist, happen to be here. Mine is, what's the relationship with Paul McKee coming from North St. Louis, going up in Pure Agro housing projects? We know we need development there. Also, what is your intake, what you think in the terms of that North Side development with Paul McKee?
I actually don't have an opinion on it. I've met with Paul McKee a number of times, and it's just so darn complicated that I don't understand it.
We don't need it.
And I think, Paul McKee is a wonderful guy, let's be clear about this, and he's been generous in lots of ways. But I think I understand that he has to raise $600 million of private money. He's never going to be able to do that. That's impossible. Private investors will not invest in that project. And that is hardly my specialty, but it just seems too big to succeed. I think we have to go at that incrementally. Now, I will confess to being in favor of one form of tax credit if it isn't abused, and that is historic preservation tax credits. And North St. Louis is loaded with old, beautiful buildings, and I think we need to save those, but we have to watch the abuse in the program. Other tax credits, I'm not very sympathetic toward.
You're such an interesting person. You're involved in so many things. Can we ask a question with some other things that you're involved in?
Sure, ask anything you want. I'm not guaranteed I'll answer it. I'm not guaranteed that I will answer it truthfully.
Well, this is a pretty heavy-duty question, especially on a college campus. And you were quoted in January 18th Post-Dispatch. Bankrolling a group for work regarding tax reform and police control issues. And Sinquefield supports his push to eliminate teacher tenure through a constitutional amendment, but that you're not leading the effort. Where are we at? I can see arguing for and against tenure. So where are we at on an amendment on that?
I can't think of a better university where I am more comfortable answering that question. Because it is a simple fact that Lindenwood University is leading the nation in this effort. I'm on the board of St. Louis University. Father Biondi has said to me many times, I hate tenure, and it's so damn hard to get rid of. It is a terrible system. It was brought in about the year 1000 to protect religious teaching from state governments. And I think it's been around long enough. It's about time we can get rid of it. Now, the problem in education is K through 12 education. See, I don't worry about college education, because you know what's great about college education is everybody is free to choose. There's no government-run monopoly in college education. Every college has to compete. Many years ago, Lindenwood almost went out of business, hanging on by its fingernails. And then you got tremendous management and people to come in, and you've turned it into a magnificent place. All you gotta do is walk around the campus and see. That's the benefits of competition. That does not exist in K through 12 in the public school system in the United States or in Missouri. And can you think of any other business where people have lifetime tenure? Can you think of any other occupation in this country where you can screw up and you can screw up children's lives permanently and they can't fire you? There was just an op-ed in, we were talking about this at lunch, the Show Me Institute, and I recall the estimate to get rid of a teacher in Missouri, or maybe it was specifically in the St. Louis public school system, a teacher who is really just horrible, cost about $100,000 in process and procedure. So you can't get rid of them. Now, it is a fact, after about 3 to 5 years in a new teacher's life, many of the good ones leave and go on to something else. And the bad ones stay, and their pay increases with time and grade. It is right now illegal to consider the performance of the students in setting the pay of teachers in Missouri. It's illegal. I mean, this is, you know what, there was a column written, and I hope I don't offend anyone. It was a published column by a man named Ralph Voss, who was a former judge in Missouri. He now owns and writes for a newspaper in central Missouri called the Unterrified Democrat. What a name. And it's in Osage County, Missouri. And he starts off, and it's something like this. He said a long time ago, decades ago, the Ku Klux Klan got together and said, how can we really hurt the African American children permanently. How can we ruin their lives? And what they designed was a public school system. Yes, ma'am.
When was the last time you were in a public school and talked to a public school teacher?
I was in Innovative Concept Academy just recently in St. Louis and got tours of,
Not a public
That's not a
school.
public school.
yes it is. It's an independent public school funded by the St. Louis public school system. But I haven't been in, maybe I've been in other, I just don't recall. But I know a lot of teachers. Yes.
I'll invite you to Ferguson Florissant School District, in which I was a school board member. We are now 41st in the nation in per student spending on education. We were 30th in the nation 10 years ago. You joined suit, when 200 school districts were suing the state for more money. You joined that, and you put out information, you fought against that raise for these students. You have not been for public education, and you want my wife, who has kids that are homeless, there are 1,300 kids who are homeless in Ferguson, Florissant. You want my wife, who has kids that are beaten and sexually abused at home. You want people that are her students who are come from drug addicted home, and you want her performance to be based on their scores. Sir, I disagree with you, and I invite you and Dr. Podgorski to meet me any place, anytime. My daughter is a graduate of this university. I will be glad to debate you on the subject of school funding anytime.
Okay, let's talk about the school funding. This was a case, it made the news, but not a whole lot. It was called the adequacy suit. These suits are going on all over the country. Well, they're slowed down since the Missouri suit. And about 220 school districts sued the state and said, we want more money for our K through 12 education. We're not getting enough money. Now, it says, I can't get into if each and every school district is properly funded. I have no idea. Are there probably misallocations of funds? Almost certainly there are. But anyway, I was persuaded to intervene because 6 to 8 weeks before this case was going to go to trial, and it would have cost Missouri taxpayers an additional $1.3 billion a year. Okay, 8 weeks before trial, Jay Nixon, the then Attorney General, whose obligation is to defend the taxpayers of the state of Missouri, had deposed exactly 2 expert witnesses. And it was clear to a lot of people that he was going to throw this case, and then that would be good for his election to governor. When we saw the magnitude of these numbers, we said, we have got to bring in experts. We intervened. Our lawyers, liberal Democrats, by the way, intervened. We brought in 40 expert witnesses from around the country. And fortunately for the state of Missouri, we had a very smart judge who was a Democrat, is now the U.S. Attorney in St. Louis. And they basically were 9 points, I think, in the case, and we won on every single point. The case ultimately revolved around, are we spending enough? The Missouri Constitution says you have to spend 25%. We were able to show we were spending a lot more than that, and that was over. Now, the second point, I know a lot of kids that have problems. They go into public schools, they go into parochial schools. Those kids need to be helped. But there's nothing wrong with evaluating teachers' performance based on how well those kids improve, not based on their condition when they come in. Do they make any improvement at all? And I'll bet you they do. I'll bet you they make a lot of improvement on these kids. There is research that shows that a good school can overcome, not entirely, but can overcome the effects of a bad home life. It can't erase it, but it can overcome it, a really good school.
Let me just make one follow-up to what you were saying, because I read Dr. Podgorski's stuff that he presented before the court.
The testimony.
His testimony before the court. And one of the things he did was he was comparing St. Louis City Schools and how they performed. And one of the problems the St. Louis City Schools have is turnover. In the year that he did, which was 2005, half of the kids switched schools. So how do you pretend to be able to evaluate a teacher when half of those kids turnover during the year. My daughter's fifth grade teacher started with 23 kids one year, ended with 23 kids, but 17 of them were different. How do you evaluate a teacher?
Well, I'm not saying the evaluation in circumstances like that is easy. We're just saying the evaluation is something that's really important and should be there. There's no other business in this country or in the world where you don't examine responses from your customers and your clients. And in this case, the trouble with the monopolistic public school system is, who's the client? It's not the children, and it's not the parents, because they don't pay the money. In any business, the client is the one that shells out the money for the good or service. The client is pretty much the state legislature. And that's the difficulty in a government-run monopoly. It's not going to get any better until we change the structure. Yes, sir.
On a completely different note, in your opinion, what will it take for humans to recapture domination of chess over machines?
I think that train left the station. I don't see how you can do it. Now, I will tell you this. I heard this from Gary Casper on it, and this is sometimes played. I forgot what the name of it is. But if you take a strong player and you give that person access to a strong chess playing program, it doesn't have to be the strongest one in the world, and you pair two teams like that, or you pair a combination like that against the computer, against a strong computer, that combination can beat the computer. So there is something to human intuition that computers do not have, and they will never have. But basically, you know, when the first computers were developed in the 40s, immediately people set out, they were interested in artificial intelligence, and the first thing they went to was programming computers to play chess. And it's been a very complicated thing, and it really didn't get successful until the 70s and 80s. Partly the speed of the computer, but really the cleverness of the programmers to figure out how to tell the computer what lines of play it ought to consider, because the computer cannot consider all of them. It can't examine every possibility. If it did, the fastest computers going could examine 1 billion positions a second, which they can. If it were to examine every possible game, it would take about 5 billion years. So that shows you the power of human intuition and judgment to be able to play as well as they do. But I don't think they're ever one-on-one. The computer won. But it doesn't diminish anybody's interest in chess. Howard.
I actually don't have a question. I have something else, something I want to say myself.
Okay.
And this is actually, I've heard a conservative case against your proposal for replacing income tax with sales tax. Is that the sales tax is so efficient at raising money because, relative to the income tax that it encourages the growth of government. So although the free market argument is clear and the economic efficiency argument is clear, that's actually the conservative argument is that it's too good at raising revenue.
It's an interesting point, but that's not going to be true in Missouri, because we have the Hancock Amendment.
Right.
And so when you raise surplus money, it has to go back to the people. Now, I don't think we're going to be able to do this, but in the interim, I would prefer to take the Hancock Amendment and say, when there's a surplus, figure out how you can start cutting the income tax rate rather than sending the money back. You send it back, but do it in the form gradually of lowering taxes. But then once the income tax is gone, you're going to generate surpluses very, very frequently. The people will be getting dividends. The other thing about a state that relies on a sales tax as opposed to an income tax is they have much more stable state revenues. And if you go to that paper I referred to, Art Laffer just plots it out. He shows the variability of state income when it comes from an income tax. When times are good, the income tax generates lots of money. When times are bad, it really plummets. That does not happen in a sales tax regime. It's a much more stable thing, much better for managing a state government. I think one more. There is one more. Yes, sir.
I'll ask you a question. Going from an income tax to a sales tax and the demographics of the taxpayer, how will the tax burden shift? It will shift from who to?
We've looked at this in infinite detail, and we don't see that any particular group, I think the low-income people win almost right off the bat, because of the reasons I gave. They're now basically exempt, or largely exempt from both forms of taxation, whereas the upper-income people are not. middle and upper income people are gonna consume, so they're gonna pay a lot more sales taxes. Overall, with the growth in the state and the migration in and more businesses and more people, everybody is going to be better off. In fact, if you just take the growth of Missouri over this long period of time and let it grow instead at the average of the 9 states that don't have an income tax, that's a tremendous amount of money that would be coming into the state. Divide that by the people, and that's additional per capita income for almost everyone. It's about as well as I can answer that one, I'm afraid. Well, thank you very much.